Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to our Foster and Adoption Fellowship today. I am so glad that you're here, whether you're in person or online. We're just glad to see you today. It's actually been over a year since we gathered together, and I know for a lot of you, you're just happy to see some people today. And so we're excited that you're here. We actually taped this video training you're about to see over a year ago, before the pandemic even started, in preparation for our fellowships last year, and we never got to use it. But I think you're going to really enjoy it. As you will see, my haircut has changed a little bit in the last year, but the content is still really good. So for today's video, we're going to be listening in on a conversation that I had with Meribeth Szwed. Meribeth is a adoptive mom at our Blankenbaker campus, and she was also adopted as a child. So she has a really unique perspective, and so I talk with her a lot about how we can engage the kids in our homes and talk about their adoption story. You'll see too, at the end of the video, I want to introduce you to Susan Kylene Jones. Susan is a local therapist who works with a lot of adoptive families. And last year we had prepared for Susan to come and teach a training for us to dig deeper into this topic of how to help our children introduce them to their story. And so she's going to be coming back in May to do that, and we'll have some more info for you at the end of the video about that training. So listen in and enjoy my conversation with Meribeth and with Susan. Well, I'm so excited this morning that you're joining us for another one of our foster and adoption fellowships. I think everybody that's here today, regardless of how your family came together, whether it was foster, domestic, international, kinship, I think you're going to find something in your story today that's going to be really powerful and really helpful. And so I'm really encouraged about that. You know, one of the questions I get asked most common from families when I sit down and talk to them is, how do I share my child's story with them? How do I talk to them about their story of being adopted? What do I tell them? When do I tell them? How do I talk to them about it? And that's really what we're going to dig into today. So I'm really excited that Meribeth has agreed to kind of share some of her story today. And I think you're going to see in her story just some really cool ways that her story weaves this thing together. She's got an incredible story of not only being an adoptive mom herself and have added some kids to their family through adoption, but Meribeth was adopted as a child, and so she's going to share a little bit of that story. Her family also came together as a kinship family, which I know we have some kinship families at many of our campuses, and so we love that we're kind of being able to tell one of those stories because it's a little unique, it's a little different in some ways. So we're going to just talk with Meribeth, hear her story and kind of how her family came together in her life, and kind of as we go through, we want to pause from time to time and give you guys a question to talk about together. So we're going to do that kind of as we talk together. So Meribeth, thanks for being here this morning and talking with us. I do want to get into your story of kind of how you guys adopted, but before we even start there, will you just tell us a little bit about your own story growing up? How did you come to be adopted? What was your family like, just kind of as you started growing up as a child?
Well, my adoption story started, I was 6 weeks old and adopted into a Christian family. My sister was also adopted. And thinking of my story, there was never a time I didn't know. There wasn't this time that I was sat down or talked to. I always knew I was adopted. So my parents had been pouring that into me, that it was a gift and that I was chosen and loved, and that the adoption was part of my story from the very beginning. So they had to be telling it to me in pieces all along the way, because there was never a time of just sitting down and speaking that.
There wasn't this big momentous occasion where we sit down at the coffee table, like we've got something serious to tell you.
Right. It was none of that. It was literally, I've always known. I can't recollect a time I didn't. And so they had to be telling it at age-appropriate times of what I could handle at the time. But it was always positive. It was always, you were a gift from us, gift to us, a gift from God, and that they had waited 10 years. So they just were so excited that it was always told that way to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the rest of your family, so you got mom, dad, anybody else kind of in your family unit a little bit?
Yes. I had a sister 2 years younger, and she too was also adopted. So it was just always a positive thing that we took. That was how our family was made, through adoption.
Yeah. So as you get older, as you hit, we see a lot of it in a lot of families, as you hit the kind of preteen, teenage years, you're trying to figure out who you are and where you fit in the world. What were some things that maybe that piece of your story of being adopted kind of came out more and you really had to think through and process that adoption a little bit for yourself?
Absolutely. Like middle school and high school, when you really start to process who you are and your identity, I really started to think of those things and very easily could have felt like there was these things missing or these pieces that were trying to fit who I am. And it was really my relationship with Christ and the things that my parents had been pouring into me, that I was loved and chosen. And so I was really able to grasp who I was in my identity in Christ, that I was loved by him and chosen and adopted, and that it was those were able to fill in the gaps, those holes that I might have had otherwise, if I didn't have my faith to fill those things in.
Yeah. And I think that's this beautiful moment where it's not just that kind of you have a father and mother biologically, but also adopted, but also this Father in heaven, right?
Absolutely.
Who's adopted you into his family, who wants you to be a part of his family. I think that's an incredible part and piece of the way to kind of frame that up. I think for those of you out here kind of listening to this story, the first place we'd like to pause and kind of give you a question to think about is we want you to kind of pause together and as a group or at your table, really pause and talk together a little bit about kind of how you have maybe started this conversation with your child, whatever age they're at. What are some ways, some moments where this came up? You're doing a school project, you're in this moment, you're doing something where questions come up of they see a friend that's pregnant and want to ask questions, right? All kinds of ways. Just talk together a little bit of kind of when did this story start? How have you started already talking with your children about their adoption story? Well, hopefully you guys had some good discussion in the room about how you started to tell your child their story of being adopted, how you began to unpack that, began to tell them that story, and as we heard from Meribeth, ways that her parents just kind of always told that story, always were relaying that story to her, which I think is really powerful. So you've told us a little bit about your upbringing, your family, kind of how you process that adoption story. So I want you to tell us a little more now, just kind of how Hannah and Stephen came into your home, kind of what your family was like, how that happened, and what that journey was like a little bit.
Well, our journey started, there was a conference here at church, and so we attended the conference about adoption, and at the time we had one child, and we're excited to adopt, felt God calling us to that, but soon found out we were expecting, and we had kind of looked to China and had talked to some agencies, and we're headed down that route, knowing we had to wait till she was 1 before we could proceed. And so as we were kind of nearing that corner around 6 months and starting to look at things, we really felt God telling us a different path, and that we had some crisis going on in our own family, that we didn't need to go around the world, that we could pour into some kids within our own family. And so it started with my niece and nephew, Hannah and Stephen, that we reached out to their mom, my sister, and said, look, we'll help however we can. We can help with homework. They can come over here for just to hang out with us, whatever we can do to just to love on them in a bigger way. And at first it was totally rejected. It was just, I don't need help, and it was kind of just shot down, I guess, so to speak. I've got this. I don't need your help. And then there were a few weeks after we had reached out to her in that way, she just kind of said there was some crisis going on within kind of her living situation, and said, can I bring the kids over? And so Stephen came first and was with us for a couple of weeks, and then Hannah soon followed. So at first it was kind of a little bit back and forth. She would bring them for a few days. We'd have them. We'd try to get them to school. And at this time we went from we had just had a baby, so we were 1 to 4 kids within 9 months. It was crazy town at our house. Yeah. And so we're figuring out homework where we had been changing diapers and just all packing lunches.
Now you're in elementary school,
yes.
All kinds of new world stuff.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
And so then it was kind of back and forth for a little bit, and then the absences started going longer. It was longer periods away, and then
Mom was away.
For a long time. Her and her husband, the kid's father, had separated, and so he wasn't in the picture at all. And so it was just more and more responsibility. We had no rights at the time, like nothing. Like we just had nothing. They were just at our house, and so we were like, we kind of sought her out and said, look, we have to have something. So she was able to give us power of attorney. They gave us a little bit of wiggle room. Just to be able to attend to some of their health needs. And so then the absences, again, just kind of went farther and farther until where their health care had fallen off. And then we were able to approach her about guardianship. Like, look, they've been with us for 6 months now. We need to have something to be able to help and care for them. And so God used that health care slip-in that we were able to put them on our health care by having guardianship. Which soon turned into this realization from my sister that we had more control than I think she wanted us to. So there was a lot of back and forth at court, we'd make decisions. And the kids weren't so much a part of that in the sense it was just because everything had been in probate court. It wasn't even in family court because of this guardianship, which was another blessing that God had gone ahead of us, that we didn't have to navigate a lot of things through that side because it was through probate court. So a lot of things were just tossed out and like, look, if you want to take this up in family court, you can. And then she would just grow frustrated and
she
stop.
had to pursue it there, and she didn't want to.
And so just more and more time would go by, and it had probably been about 2.5 years where she had been gone. Before we decided that we were just like, if she came back, we would proceed with counseling and still let her in. But there was more, some things that she was dealing with, some mental issues, mental health issues that she was dealing with, and things that we just really wanted to protect the kids from, because the longer they were with us, the more trauma that we realized they had endured and neglect, and we just wanted to protect them in the best way that we could. And so it was a long journey. They were with us for over 5.5 years before we were able to adopt them. But it was God's perfect timing, because it came in that she was willing to do it, and she sought us out to adopt them. Yeah. And so while there's not been that reconciliation just yet, we're confident that in the Lord's timing that it'll happen.
Yeah. I mean, it's a long, complicated. I think, as I talked with a lot of kinship families, grandparents caring for grandkids, aunts and uncles like you in your case, like it's always very complicated, right? Because there's these relationships. I think even foster families that I know, and even domestic adoptive families who have relationships with birth parents, right? It can be complicated in navigating those things. As you're going through this journey, how did that journey of you're caring for the kids, you're concerned about them, you're interacting, how'd that affect your relationship with your sister, or maybe even with your parents, kind of going through that journey?
Well, it was tricky. Tricky. My parents really wanted to help my sister get in a better place, and they didn't want the tension that was between us with having the kids kind of interfere with that. So they just wanted to be the champion for everybody, and it's hard to be a champion for everybody when sometimes there's just a right course.
Yeah. I mean, I think just navigating those things are complicated. I mean, those are complicated relationships, and you're adding all this layer, you're involving court systems, and just that whole process, I think, can be very complicated. I think, it is very different. It's very unique for, I think, what a kinship family goes through. That's a little different than what a typical adoptive family goes through. But I think right now I want to kind of turn back and let you guys talk a little bit as a group again. I think the commonality that you can find in this story and into your stories is really, how do you, as you engage your child, as you talk about their story, how do you talk about their family with them? How do you talk about birth parents? How do you talk about extended family, if you know? And sometimes when you don't know very much, how have you engaged that story with them to kind of tell them who birth mom is, who birth dad is, who extended siblings are, if you know who they are? How's that happened for you in your own families as you've talked through that story? So again, together as a group or at your tables, I just want you to talk a little bit about how that's come up in your own families already and how you've talked together about those stories. Well, I'm sure you're having some good discussion. We don't want to break that up completely, but we do want to get back and kind of talk a little bit more about Meribeth's story and kind of how the kids kind of came in. So you've heard her story of being adopted and how Hannah and Stephen came into their home and their family a little bit. But I want you, Meribeth, to just talk a little bit about, as the kids, we've talked about your sister and that relationship there, kind of how the kids came to be adopted. But tell us a little bit, as Hannah and Stephen started integrating into your home, what were some of the challenges maybe and difficulties of them kind of integrating into your family and kind of coming into the home to begin with?
Absolutely. The first challenge was that we had been the fun aunt and uncle that got to do the birthday parties and all the fun things, and now we were mom and dad, that we had to step into that role of homework, which had really not been done consistently before. And my oldest had studying for a test. What was studying? That you had prepared for that, and just some common rules. They had a lot of times, in some ways, had cared for themselves in certain aspects for us to come in and to tell them like the rules of our house and just some common things that they really struggled with taking those at first. Because who were we? We were the fun aunt and uncle. Why were we telling them what they could and could not do? It was also a struggle, just the sheer number. We had literally just gone from 1 to 4 kids in 9 months. That we were overwhelmed, and we have this sign on our door, our bedroom door, that your grace is enough. Because it literally, there was every other day, Dustin and I wanted to throw in our hands up and throw in the towel. And thankfully, it was never on the same day. But it was just really, it was really tough. It was stepping into the places where, and I think being older, that they were older kids, those roles had already been filled. There had been a mom and dad in that situation for a long time. They were 6 and 9 when they came to us. And so just recognizing that we weren't competing for those roles, that we were there to just love on them. And they pushed us, specifically, Stephen pushed us to make sure that we were really good to our word, that we were going to be there no matter what he threw at us, that we would stand the test of time, and that we really proved that our love to him. And it was really hard, but his grace was enough that we got through each day, and the next day came. It was a little scary around about 9-month period of them being with us. We were just starting to feel like we were treading water and found out we were expecting.
So now we're up to 5 kids.
We're up to 5 kids,
yeah.
And I thought the Lord was trying to kill me. But she was what we needed, that really wove our family together, because it had kind of been an us and them. Mm-hmm. But then everybody in the family experiencing that pregnancy, she was the thread that the Lord used to weave us together. And she was theirs. That was their sister, and only like he can brought us together using Annabelle.
Yeah, and I think this is so common that kids kind of have this balance of trying to come in and understand rules and boundaries, and kids that haven't built up a lot of trust in the past, right, and don't have solid kind of roles and attachments, that now they're trying to reestablish those things, and they're not sure, like, can I trust you? Are you reliable? I haven't seen reliable parents and role models. So this back and forth becomes kind of a challenging thing for them in navigating this. So were there moments where you felt like you were able to even reflect back in your experience of being adopted that helped you think through what Hannah and Stephen were going through, and maybe empathize with them, understand more kind of what they were struggling with?
Absolutely. Thinking back on my own story and how I processed that, first was just telling them my story, right? Communicating, like, you're not alone in this. I have this story too, and God used it in an amazing way, and he's going to use whatever we're walking through in your story in an amazing way too. And just to having them have that trust in that, and to begin that trust. It was also knowing that my parents had always been so positive about it. And so knowing that it was my sister as well, always being positive whenever I spoke about her, no matter how I had been feeling that time, that it was always going to come across that she loves you so much, that's why you're here. Yeah. And she loves me, and I miss her too. And just really speaking to that love aspect of why they were with us. And also just in little things of just knowing that certain situations were going to be just hard for them. So just keeping in mind that that our stories are different, but speaking to that same fact that I was with them in that journey.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that ability to kind of have understanding that as kids come to you with this sense of kind of like, I miss mom, I wish she was here, right? You're able to say, I get that. Like, I understand that. I miss her too. Like, I understand that sense. I think sometimes you can feel this sense of threat when that comes up of, oh, but you should love me and when I should be enough. And there's still loss there. There's still hurt and pain. And admitting that hurt and pain exists is really helpful for kids to even process that. So I want to give you just an opportunity to just say, like, what are some things, if you thought, hey, what are some tips, what are some advice that you would say from your own story, as well as having adopted yourself, that you could give to some parents listening of, what are some things they could do? What are some things I could even try in my family that might be, here's some things to think about for your adopted child kind of as they're going through life, some things that you could think about just being aware of and trying with them.
For my own story, one of the things we're just remembering is the family tree, right? That's a little tricky.
That project, when
it's dreaded, and it came when it came up for our kids. I knew that it was going to be an issue, right? It was going to bring up some things, and there was acting out afterwards, and recognizing that acting out was not any certain reason, but that project just drew up some things, some feelings, and just recognizing that could be hard for kids. It depends on the ages. Really, with our kids, we started to notice different triggers. That holidays were hard. They had holidays and traditions and all these things before they came to us. So when I didn't make a big deal about Valentine's Day, it was a hard day because they had gone overboard and above and beyond. And I thought, oh, here's a candy and a little chocolate. It was enough, and it wasn't enough because they had experienced such a different experience without me in that. Also recognizing the first little bit, it was kind of like a minefield, that different things, we would drive by a park, and it might have been a park that they had such a positive experience with their dad. And so they were just kind of rotten the next few days because they were processing that memory of such a good time with their dad. Yeah. And so as we got to know the kids deeper, we were able to recognize some of those things. Right. They still happen every now and then. That we would have to pause and say, where is this behavior coming from? This is so out of character of them. So we've got to sit down and kind of just talk it through. Like, where's this coming from? What's making you feel this way? Because it's probably some trigger that they may recognize or they may not that has brought up some of those feelings.
Yeah. No, I do. I think it's always this kind of diagnosis of like, what is this? Where is this coming from? Is this just you didn't eat a snack and have some water today? Yeah. Or is this more? And if it's more, like, let's find ways that we can talk it, get it out, process it in some helpful ways. So I want to give you guys one more question to kind of talk with as a group, and then we're going to come back and introduce you to somebody else who's going to be doing a training in a couple weeks for us on this same topic to dive a little deeper. But one question just to leave you with, just as a group, talk a little bit more about this question of just how have you noticed maybe some behaviors, some things that were going on with your kids, and you at some point traced it back to them processing their own story. So whether it is this park, a food, a memory, something coming up for them that you, as you processed it with them, really understood that it was a part of their own story that they were trying to process. So again, with your table, with your group, talk together a little bit about that question, and then we'll come back for just another minute. Well, I hope that you guys got a lot out of this morning, but what I can tell you is that in 45 minutes or so that you guys were together, we probably just scratched the surface of this topic. And so right now I've got Susan Kylene, who's here. Susan is a therapist here in the community, works with a lot of foster and adoptive families and kind of processing story. And so Susan has agreed to do a training for us in just a couple weeks at the end of April on a child's story, and kind of how we help a child understand their story as adoptive parents. So tell us a little bit just what that training is going to entail, kind of what it's going to cover for a family.
Well, so as an adoptive mom, as well as a therapist, what I want to do is just kind of help normalize the struggle for parents. So I understand the struggle not only as a counselor, but also as a mom of 3 adopted kids. Yeah. And try to give families tools in order that they might create a culture that creates felt safety, right? For a child to be able to express their feelings or to connect a story in kind of a natural way. Yeah. So I work with kids both with great intention to create a story and also with parents in order to help them deal with those things that come up in the moment.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So part of this training then is to give parents tools and strategies and ways to help their kids regulate emotion as they're expressing story, ways to normalize the curiosity, because with story, story brings about healing. Yeah. It's bringing things into the light, and we're called to be in the light. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. That's cool. Yeah, I think there's sometimes this nervousness about a child's story and the challenges and the trauma and the stuff, but it really is, man, as we can expose it to the light and really let healing and hope occur, I think that's the hope.
That's the key. Oftentimes parents will say, well, I'm not sure how much of their story to tell or when to tell it because they seem fine. Yeah. And I don't want to rock the boat. Yeah. And what I know as a counselor who will meet with children is they have a lot going on inside and oftentimes don't feel the permission to talk about things or to bring it out. Yeah. And so parents need a way in which they can do that so that it does feel very natural and so that children aren't protecting the feelings of their parents and stuffing emotion and dealing with their pain and struggles on their own. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. I think it's clear you can hear there's a lot of depth in Susan's experience with this and the wisdom she's going to bring. Well, I hope that you enjoyed the conversation this morning, both listening to Meribeth and Susan, but also the conversation that happened wherever you are. Hopefully you guys got some great insights, but I can tell you one thing is that we probably just scratched the surface of where this conversation can go. So I hope that you will join us in a couple weeks on May 4th and May 18th. Susan's going to be here to do a training with us on a child's story, helping our foster and adoptive children process their story. And so it's going to be on a Tuesday night from 7:30 to 9 p.m. You can join us in person at the Blankenbaker campus, or you can join us online by Zoom. And we've actually already got 3 hours of foster parent training credit available for this training. So you're going to want to tune in. You're going to want to check it out. You can register right now at southeastchristian.org, or we're going to be sending you an email this week with more information. So I hope you had some great time today in fellowship, and we hope to see you again next time.